Welcome to Disclosure. I'm your host for today's program, Jean Boonstra. Disclosure is brought to you by the Voice of Prophecy, and we are located now in the beautiful state of Colorado, in downtown Loveland, Colorado. We relocated here from Southern California, where the ministry started, more than 85 years ago. We relocated just about 2 years ago now, and it's a wonderful place. So if you happen to be traveling through Loveland, Colorado, stop by, and we would love to see you and meet you in person. Well, my guest today is Speranza Pesos, and I am really delighted to have her here with us on the program, to have her share her story with you, because it's a powerful story. It's one that reminds us that no matter the circumstances we find ourselves in at the moment or in life, that there's hope. There is always hope. And, I believe that as you are listening to this program, I don't know where you are. Maybe you're at home listening on your laptop. Perhaps you're listening on a mobile device walking around your neighborhood, or probably you're listening in your car while you're driving. And I know that as I've been in seasons of trial and discouragement in my own life, when I was driving, that was an opportune time for me to pray. It's a place of finding quiet space where I could just talk honestly to God. And if our program today meets you in that quiet space where you're struggling with something, I believe that you'll be blessed by this message, this family's journey. God had their hand over them. And James chapter 1 and verses 2 and 3, this verse really reminds me. It says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience." The trials and tests of life, they don't need to bring necessarily disappointment or discouragement. Hebrews, that great faith chapter, Hebrews chapter 11, also has this encouragement for us in verse 27. It says, and it's speaking about Moses, "By faith he, Moses, forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible." These verses and Speranza's story give us a glimpse of the fact that Christian joy and courage, they aren't necessarily based on the circumstances that you find yourself in right now, that I found myself in throughout my life. A relationship with Christ gives us something that secular theories and philosophies cannot. They give us a framework for intelligently understanding just perhaps why we suffer trials and how to get through them with hope. And my guest today has a beautiful story of hope. Speranza, welcome to Disclosure.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor.
Well, you are joining us from Orlando, Florida, and there you are busy. You are a wife, a mother. We both have something in common, which is we are proud mothers of 2 daughters.
Yes.
And you also work as the spiritual ambassador coordinator for Florida Hospital, which is a fascinating role, which perhaps we'll have a chance to find out a bit more about. But you're here today to share a story that happened to you when you were young, one that will absolutely inspire, I'm sure, many of those listening. I know it has already made a difference to me personally, listening and reading your story of the journey that God took you on. So I have to tell you, let's start right at the beginning. Tell us about where you were born and what the political climate was like as you were growing up.
Sure. So I was born and raised actually in Romania, and under the communist regime of one of the worst modern dictators, dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. And as I was growing up, I was born in a family of Seventh-day Adventist Christians, and so I grew up with obviously the Bible stories and learning about Jesus, and so somewhat sheltered from what was happening outside of our home. Okay. Until, however, when I finally reached the point of going to school, which was first grade. And during the communist regime, Romania's school system, and many years after, was actually from Monday through Saturday, which meant that the students had to go to school 6 days a week. And so that became an interesting point of reference for me. But as I was growing up, the Romania, which used to be a kingdom, formerly a kingdom, had become really a country of portions and rations. We would have to stay in line for hours just for one liter of milk or a kilogram of sugar. There was absolutely no freedom of press, no freedom of religion. One out of three was a Securitate agent, which is the equivalent of a KGB agent. So
one in
we
three
really didn't know
people.
who we could trust. So the regime was very oppressive, and it was a very, very challenging and difficult situation to be able to grow up in.
Okay. So this is what you're born into.
Yes.
Before you enter the school years, your family kept you a little bit sheltered from what was going on. But you describe a situation where 1 in 3 were potentially part of this. How did you pronounce that? Securitate?
Securitate.
Thank you.
So
which is the equivalent? I think we're all familiar with
the Romanian
the KGB. So the equivalent of what the KGB would be.
Yes.
So that's a climate where your family wouldn't have a lot of freedom, not a lot of expression, but as a young girl, wonderfully, you're isolated from that somewhat.
Yes.
So was there a sense, even at that young age, that maybe your family, being Christian, that you were different, or were you a little bit oblivious at that early stage?
I really believe that I was oblivious at that stage. I think that even after I began, which was very interesting, that my parents had the wisdom to not impose or even channel me in one direction or another. When I began first grade, mom and dad never said, you need to come to church with us on Sabbath. Mm-hmm. They sent me to school. So for literally 2 years, first grade, second grade, I went to school on Sabbath. And I began to see the difference. I'm going to school, yet my family is going to church. So that began a process in my young head. There's something different here. What is happening? And so that was probably the beginning stages for me to realize there is definitely a difference in my family. Why is it that that I'm going to school, they're going to church? There's definitely something here that I need to think about, and I carried that out, until the third grade.
Okay. So what happens when you're in third grade? You're about 9 years old when you're in third grade. Did you have to make a decision?
So by the third grade, I remember having a conversation with my mom and my dad, because I would go to church obviously during vacations, and I told Mom, I said, I really want to continue going to church with you during the school year as well. And I remember Mom looking at me and saying, do you understand what that choice implies?
Yeah.
Now, I am 9 years old.
Yeah.
Of course I didn't understand the implications of that kind of a choice at that age. But of course I was so eager to continue going to church with them that I said, yes, I do. And she said, Speranza, I want to make sure that if you make that choice, honey, that choice will be yours, because this could be what can happen to you if you make that choice.
Okay.
Your colleagues, your students will make fun of you. They may call you names. Things can happen to you. Your grade in character and behavior can be affected. And really, any girl, the only people that had a lowered than an A character and behavior grade were the incorrigible students. And that actually impacted you all the way through to university, because once you had that grade lowered, you would be in jeopardy of not being able to even finish your education, your elementary education, and it would impact you in your high school, and most of the time would not allow you to even enter university.
So an attitude or some rebellious behavior when you're 9 years old or younger could travel with you all the way into adulthood.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you had this conversation with your mother where she was honest with you. Once you made that choice to follow through with your beliefs, did you start to feel some of those effects that your mom predicted? Did you get some retaliation from your classmates and your teachers about being a Christian?
Yeah, it began slowly,
Mm-hmm.
and then it continued intensifying to the point where various class mates would call me names that and some names that I would not even dare to repeat. I remember one young man throwing stones at me
Dear.
at the entry gate of the school, so that he would make me be late, and get even more retaliation from my teachers. Absolutely, my grade and behavior grade was affected, and I received a C instead of an A. And for a girl, that was a huge stigma, because
Sure.
that traveled with me throughout the whole years. And the climax, I would say, of that persecution intensified continually, but in seventh grade, that really erupted.
Okay. So was there a particular teacher or a situation that happened in seventh grade that really was a intensified everything?
Sure. So in seventh grade, I had a math teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and by the way, to this day, I dislike math. I think because of the consequences and the impact that
An
teacher made on me.
influence on you, yeah.
She was a staunch communist,
Okay.
and she began the communist propaganda, of course, in the classroom. And when she realized that and by the way, I had math with her twice a week, and one of those days was actually on Saturday.
Okay.
So she threatened me, and she told me that I needed to come to school on Saturday, that I cannot miss her class, and that if I would miss her class, she would fail me. And of course, I continued not attending school on Saturdays, and then she began prompting the class, the entire class, discussing my case and my belief system
With the whole class. Oh boy. That would be extremely uncomfortable, to say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So especially when I was not there.
Right.
And specifically, I know this happened for a fact on a Saturday, where she told the entire class, "I will teach her who is God," and it's her God does not exist. God is our leader. God is Ceausescu, and I will teach her who is God. And I am forbidding you, each one of you, to give her any notes. And on Monday, when she comes back to school, I will show her who is in charge and what she really needs to do.
Wow. Well, Speranza, we have to take a short break, but you've painted for us a picture of what your early years were like growing up in communist Romania, what it was like to be a Christian in that environment, and the challenge you faced. You know, it's tough enough to be a teenager those early years, but to have a teacher who's a staunch communist standing against you and turning your classmates really against you. But this is not the end of your story. This is just the beginning. And we're going to take a short break. But when we come back, I want you to hear what happens next in Speranza's life. It's the beginning of a miraculous journey. You're listening to Disclosure. We'll be right back.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions, like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, does my life really matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
Hey kids, have you ever had questions like, is there anything or anyone out there other than humans? Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today.
Welcome back to Disclosure. I'm your host for today's program, Jean Boonstra. And with me in the studio, well, not physically with me, but joining me by phone is Speranza Pesos. And she has an incredible story, which she's chronicled in a book. And if you are on our website and you're watching, I can show it to you now. The book is called Hope in Present Danger. And it's the story of God's leading her and her family out of Romania during the years of the communist regime. It's a wonderful book. I personally read it over the weekend and I was very, very blessed by it. And we'll have information on where you can find that on our website, vop.com/disclosure, and just look for the show notes. Well, Speranza, I want to pick up your story here. We ended just before the break talking about what it was like to grow up as a young girl in a Christian family, some of those choices you had to make there in a communist regime. Mm-hmm. Now, at the age of 14, your life journey changed dramatically. Tell us what happened.
So at the age of 14, and by the way, I just wanted to go quickly back to
Sure.
the math teacher, because as I had mentioned before, she had forbidden all of my classmates to give me any notes, and wanted to make sure that I was going to be ridiculed in front of the entire class. That Sunday after Saturday, I heard a knock on my door, and several of the students had come and brought me the notes and gave me the warning of what the teacher was going to do that following week with me. And I was so grateful, yet I was so scared. And so I remember Mom and Dad just praying with me and saying, you know what, God is with you. Go and know that God is with you. And so that week, sure enough, the following week, she called me to the blackboard. She gave me a huge compass and asked me to draw angles. I did it the best that I could. The chalk in the compass, however, was faulty, was loose. I was so scared and I terrified to tell her anything. She sent me back to my seat and told me, you have a 3. Now, some of us may not be familiar with what a 3 means.
Yeah, tell us.
A 4 was an F. So a
Worse
3,
than a fail.
Right, was a slap in the face.
Yeah.
And I remember just wondering and not knowing how I'm going to go back home and tell my parents now that I had an F in math.
Yeah.
And so so all of those things were just beginning to erode at my heart. But having gone through all of that, truly nothing prepared me for the day when my parents sat me down after having received the phone call, where I watched my dad run to the telephone, picking up the phone, and begin to cry uncontrollably and saying, he's alive, he's alive, he's alive. And I thought, what happened? Who was in such danger? Who's alive? And then it was my mom and dad that motioned me after Dad hung up the phone, motioned me to sit down. And it was at that moment that my parents began to tell me the plan that they had to escape Romania. My uncle, who had been a weightlifting coach, had been approached by the KGB, by the Romanian KGB, and told to be an informant in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And my
Not given
uncle
a choice. He was just told that this is what he would do. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He was asked, but when you are asked in a communist regime, you are not really asked.
Sure. Right.
And so he requested a couple of days to think about it. Of course, he was never going to do that, but he asked for some time so he can figure out how he can get away. He connected with a friend of his, paid him a large sum of money. The person lived on the border of what was then Yugoslavia, on the Blue Danube. That man lowered my uncle in the Danube at the midnight switching of the guards.
Wow.
And my uncle swam across the Danube into what was then Yugoslavia and then walked his way into Trieste, Italy. My parents did not know if he was dead or alive for over a week until that phone call came. And it was then that my parents told me, we need to leave.
Okay.
We must escape because now our family is in danger. And so at 14, I feel like my head is spinning. I just hear now that my uncle had just escaped. It's a matter now of days before the communist regime puts all of this together, because my other aunt and uncle had escaped into Austria. So it was just our family that was left, and it was a matter of just a short amount of time before the communist regime would put all of these pieces together, and we would be in terrible danger.
Yeah, grave danger. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, grave danger.
So your family so this is the first you're hearing about this. Your parents have kept this information under wraps just for the safety of you, I'm sure. They didn't want you to accidentally slip some piece of information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, so this is the first time that I'm hearing about it, and I'm thinking, so now what?
Yeah.
What do we do? How can we get away? And it was at that point that my mom and dad began to expressed to me that their plan had been to actually go on a trip to Germany, but that trip had been denied, and so the only other option would be for us to apply for my mom and I now for an excursion in quotation marks, of course, to Turkey, to Istanbul, Turkey.
Okay. So the first steps of the plan are now revealed to you, and I can only imagine how you were processing that. And I remember reading in your book, Speranza, that you had to get permission, you had to go to your school and face your principal or your vice principal to get actually permission to leave on this trip with your mother. So
Correct.
now let's fast forward slightly. You and your mom. The plan is you are going to go on what to the authorities would appear to be just a little mini vacation, just across the border, a couple of borders into Turkey.
Right.
But the two of you alone, leaving your father, your little sister, your grandparents behind. So that's the first part of the trip. How does that all come together?
So we did first when I heard of this, the first question was, what about Dad? What about you? What about my little sister who's 4 years old? And it's at that moment that Dad says, it's just you. You would realize that we have to stay behind as assurance that you would come back.
Yeah.
We cannot travel together. You need to go. And so we don't know. We apply, of course, for this excursion.
Yes.
We do get the permission from my school. We apply, and we do not find out whether or not we have been approved for this excursion except hours, literally the afternoon before a 6 o'clock departure the following day. And so within 2 weeks, we found out that we were approved, but it was literally hours before we were to leave that morning. And so as that morning came about, I remember clearly my dad looking, my parents were photographers, so my father pulled out his camera that he gave to my mom. He pulled out of the camera the film, and in the spool of the film, he inserted 300 Deutschmarks. If anyone during the communist regime was caught having foreign currency, that would immediately be a red flag and thrown in prison. So that was a big no-no. So my father inserted these 300 Deutschmarks in the camera spool and gave the camera to my mom and said, be careful with this. You know what can happen if they find it. And then I watched my mom walk towards my little sister. This is early in the morning, walking towards my little sister who's just sleeping peacefully. She's 4 years old. And she bends over and she kisses her.
I just can't imagine as a mother. I think I can kind of imagine, but to actually experience that. Oh, were you able as a teenager to see the pain that was for your mother to have to say goodbye to her youngest child?
I remember, I don't think I processed all of it until I myself became a mother.
Yeah, makes sense.
But I remember Mom just putting her hands to her beautiful chocolate hair and just looking at her, although as though just saying, when you wake up, you will not see your mommy.
Yeah.
But it's because I love you, because I want you to live in a place where you can freely worship God, that I'm going to go, but know that I love you, and know that God will protect you, and hope to see you again. And so, I think it took me a while to finally understand. I just remember that image.
The image stayed with you.
Yeah. And then I remember my grandfather just praying a beautiful prayer, blessing, asking God to protect us, to care for us, and to get us to freedom and hope to see each other again.
So you and your family made that difficult decision that you and your mother would go. So you are approved for this. You get on the bus. You must have been terrified going through those checkpoints with those Deutschmarks hidden inside the camera, knowing that if at any moment they'd been discovered, would it have been death to both of you, or imprisonment for sure?
For sure, imprisonment. Imprisonment.
Yeah.
I think probably much worse for my father.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that as we were waiting for the bus, we were supposed to go into the bus within the next 45 minutes or so. And so I was hungry, and my dad said, "I'm going to go grab you something to eat." And as he did, the tour guide said, "You know what? We are going to be boarding the bus sooner than anticipated." And all I remember is looking at my mom and saying, "What about Dad?" And I don't know what my face must have looked like, but my dad had warned me that I had to be careful because there were informants, there were Securitate agents in that trip, and I had to be very, very careful. So I remember Mom just squeezing my hand almost as a reminder, "Watch out, you are being watched." And so we got on the bus, and I was just looking desperately for my dad.
Were you able to find him?
I'm sorry?
Oh, it's emotional, isn't it? I just can't imagine what it was like for you having to get on a bus, act like you and your mom were just going on a shopping excursion, nothing out of the ordinary. And yet you had no assurance that you would see your father again, and not being able to hug him goodbye.
Right.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break here, Speranza, but we've heard the beginning of your story. You're growing up in communist Romania, the plan for your family to find freedom. And I can only imagine the fear and the trembling that you set out on that journey with. But God was with you. You had that hope in your heart. And you listening, I don't know what difficult circumstances you're in, but just like Speranza had that hope in her heart, you can have that same hope and assurance with you, no matter the circumstances of your journey right now. Well, we are at the bottom of our program, and on some stations we're going off the air, but if we do go off the air now at the end of the half hour, I know you want to hear the rest of this story. So join us at vop.com/disclosure. Otherwise, stay with us right here, and we'll be right back after this short break.
Creation, evolution. Where did the world come from? Where did you come from? Were you created in an instant? Did you evolve from another animal or life species? These are issues that are discussed in classrooms, textbooks, and sometimes around your break table at work, when the conversation suddenly turns serious. These kinds of questions are answered in our free Discover Bible guides. These 26 beautifully illustrated guides cover all the major themes of the Bible, and they answer some of the hardest questions of life. You can get your free copy just for the asking by contacting me. Go to VOP.com and click on the tab that says Study. That's VOP.com, the tab that says Study, or phone me, 888-456-7933. That's 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible guides, available just for the asking.
Welcome back to Disclosure. I'm your host for today, Jean Boonstra, and today my guest is Speranza Pesos. She has an incredible story. A story of hope. God led her and her family out of communist Romania. It was a difficult journey, a dangerous journey, but throughout that journey they had hope. And Speranza, you have chronicled your story in a book that you have entitled Hope in Present Danger, the perfect title for what you went through in that time in your life. You know, just before the break, we sort of left you and your mother on a curb almost, waiting to say goodbye to your father, and you weren't able to hug him goodbye. But I want to fast forward just a little bit because I want to make sure we're able to tell your whole story. So you and your mother get on that bus for what is, according to the authorities, just a little excursion over to Turkey for a few days. But you and your family know the truth, which is the fact that this is the beginning, the first step of your family's plan to flee Romania, to find freedom. So I remember the descriptions, and you're a wonderful writer. The language you use just took me straight into that Turkish bazaar. So you're with the tour group, you and your mother are shopping, and you have a plan. So tell us what happens.
Sure. So the plan that my mom had was that somehow, some way, we would separate ourselves from the group during the trip when we were going to the bazaar. The bazaar is, if you have been in Istanbul, the bazaar is actually pretty much a city underneath the city of Istanbul.
Sounds beautiful.
So, yeah, it's huge. So the night before, I remember just trying to put my clothes into the bag, and Mom said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm getting the clothes for tomorrow." And she said, "Honey, you cannot do that. The only thing we can take for tomorrow is this camera that has the 300 Deutschmarks. If anyone would discover you have clothes in that bag, that would be a dead giveaway. You are going to just have to leave everything behind." And so at 14, thinking, what am I going to wear?
Sure.
What am I going to it was just really, really difficult. And so we went into the bazaar, and so the hope and the plan was that somehow, some way, we would make our way out after everyone has gotten into the depths of the bazaar and hopefully get into a taxi and make our way to the Austrian embassy, because, as I mentioned before, my aunt and uncle had requested already a political asylum in Austria. So our hope was that we can make it to that Austrian embassy, and then they would send us to Austria. That way we could be together with our family.
Okay. So that's your plan, and if I recall correctly, that's the extent of your plan. You had one goal: get in that cab, get to the Austrian embassy, and seek political asylum.
Yes.
So you were able to do that. What happened when you got to the embassy?
So when we got to the embassy, and that's an entire story altogether. Yes. But when we got to the embassy, we were actually told that we could not be helped by them, that they couldn't help us. Yeah. And they began to tell us why. Later on, we found out that the immigration law does not allow you to overstep a country that is already democratic. So we were already in Turkey. We had to be, by immigration laws, we had to be processed within the country of Turkey. We could not bypass Turkey and be sent to Austria. So literally, as we came out of the Austrian embassy, my mom at 34 years old, me at 14, two women in a Muslim country, two Christian women in a Muslim country, a mother and a daughter. We literally sat ourselves on the edge of a ledge on the street and did not speak, did not know what to say. All we heard was, "We cannot help you."
Well, and the adrenaline and the fear and the anxiety of just getting into that cab and getting there, and to be met with a wall. Right. I just can't imagine the emotions that were racing through you, or were you almost numb to it at that point?
I remember we were silent for quite a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything. Mom didn't say anything. And after, this was the only plan we had. It wasn't like plan A out of plan B or
Right,
C.
right.
It was the only plan.
Yeah.
We were in a metropolis where we did not speak the language. We knew not a soul. We had no other plan. We were in the middle of nowhere, and we had no one that we can turn to except our God.
Oh, yeah.
No one. And so I remember after what it felt like a long time, Mom said, maybe the bus will pass by here and we can go back home.
Oh, so in other words, give up and say
Give
we
up.
tried,
And-
but yeah. But instead, what happened?
So at that moment, when I heard those words, it was almost like someone just woke me up. And I said, Mom, there is no way we can go back home. They would kill us if we were to go back home. And so at that very moment, as she said those words, I remember seeing someone across the street who was in uniform. And I said, Mom, let's go. Maybe he can help us. And so we crossed the street. We got to this gentleman who was in uniform. I began speaking to him in French because I spoke French. He didn't speak any French, but obviously he understood that we needed help. He
Sure.
took us around the corner, and unbeknownst to us, right there was actually a police station. They could not help us, but they got us to someone who spoke French, where I was able to explain to them that we were seeking political asylum due to the religious persecution we had suffered. We were here on an excursion. We did not want to go back to Romania because of everything that has happened. Can they help us? They then they explained to us that they would place us in a taxi. They would take us to the police headquarters, and then there we would be able to be helped. And that was exactly what happened when we got to the police station, to the headquarters. It was a sea of police cars. And I remember that after several hours, where the only word that my mom could understand and hear was the word harem.
Oh,
that was the
terrifying.
only word she could understand.
Yeah,
they motioned to us and put us in a van. The van looked like it was an Alfred Hitchcock movie scene. There were sheets on the seats. There was a bulb dangling, from the ceiling. There were absolutely no windows except a small little grill in the corner. And the van took off. We had no idea where we were taken. We had no idea what was going to happen to us. And after what seemed like a long time, I remember telling my mom, it is so dark in here. I am so scared. And Mom just holding me and reminding me that God is with us. And I remember her words, Speranza, focus on the light. Look in that corner. Focus on the light. If you focus on the light, darkness will disappear.
Oh, amen. Amen.
So as we continued on, we finally heard the van slowing down. And then we heard these huge iron gates reverberate as they were opening. And we heard this boom, 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 this huge gates hitting the walls. And I just burst into tears, and I knew at that moment that we arrived in prison and that they were going to kill us.
I just can't imagine how terrifying that would be. You and your mother, two young women. Your mother was very young too. Yeah. You can't speak the language. You can't even see the streets, the roads that they're driving you down. And then suddenly to feel like you've landed in prison. What happened when they finally opened those van doors?
So I don't know what our faces must have looked like, probably pure terror. And I remember when those doors opened, we looked down and we were literally parked in a room, and there was carpet on the floor. And then we heard a voice speaking to us in Romanian. And there was a tall gentleman with salt and pepper hair, and I will never forget that man's face, because he said, you are safe now, in Romanian, in our own language. You can come out. You are safe now. And we were stuck. We could not come out. We could not even move. And I remember him extending his hand to my mom and saying again, you are safe. You are safe. You are.
What an assurance. What an assurance.
Yeah.
So where were you? Were you at another embassy, or where did you end up?
Yes, we were at the intelligence headquarters. And
Okay.
so when we got out of the van, we
Mm-hmm.
saw in the corner the American flag.
Oh.
And so seeing that symbol of freedom, we realized that we were safe. And so this was the intelligence headquarters where they were taking every single possible refugee or someone who was seeking political asylum to be interrogated to see whether or not they were spies
Well, of
or
course.
they were legitimate
Yeah.
people seeking political asylum.
Right. And of course, this was at the height of the Cold War. So
In
a
79.
claim,
Yeah.
79, okay.
Yes.
So a claim of wanting political asylum would have to be heavily scrutinized.
Absolutely.
So you end up here, this kind gentleman who can speak to you in your mother tongue. I just can't imagine how reassuring that was. So did he help you then transition to a path of freedom? What was the next step for you?
Yes, absolutely. So usually the entire process of whether or not of interrogation would be between 3 to 5 days.
Okay.
He quickly realized that we were not spies, and so within a day and a half, we were actually approved to be placed in a refugee camp. And so from that, we ended up in a refugee camp, and where we stayed for several months, where conditions, of course, deplorable. No one is made for a refugee camp. It was very difficult, but yet at the same time, it was a safe place, and we were able to communicate with my dad to let him know that we were well and we were alive, and so that began the process of the possibility of reunification with our family. But one thing that I want to mention is that which was a very difficult process, very challenging. We were told that oftentimes the reunification of the family could take up to 5 years.
Oh,
so
just
imagine
hearing
my little
that.
sister was
Yeah.
4 years old.
Right.
4 years old, 5 years. That was the amount of time that it could take up to. And so that was very, very challenging. We also heard while we were in the refugee camp that Ceausescu, the dictator, had passed a law to stop all reunifications of the families. And I remember Mom saying, I have to go back. I cannot live without my family. So very challenging times, very difficult times. At the same time, in that amazing place, what I have to mention is the fact that I often thought about the fact that God has chosen a cradle of safety for us, which was actually a Muslim country for a Christian family.
Well, Speranza, we're going to have to take a short break, but I'm glad you shared that just before the break, because this harrowing journey, the anxiety, the separation from your father and your little sister, and the pure terror that you and your mother experienced, finally you met someone who could speak in your mother tongue. You know, I think of how when we all get to heaven, we're all going to understand God. Your description made me think of what that experience will be like. And in the midst of all of this, you had the hope that God was with you. So we're going to take a short break, but I want to hear the rest of your story, and particularly just how you and your mother got through this trying circumstance, your entire family. You're listening to Disclosure. We'll be right back right after this quick break. Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions? Like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Does my life really matter to God? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers that you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter the most to you. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
Earthquakes, tornadoes, wildfires. Around us, homes are being lost, lives are threatened, and some people are asking the question, does God even care about me? The Bible answers that question, and what it says is very encouraging. Find out what God says regarding this topic and some of life's greatest issues in our free Discover Bible Guides. Go to VOP.com and click on Study, or call us 888-456-7933.
Welcome back to Disclosure. You've joined us in the final segment of today's program, and don't fear, if you missed the first 3 segments, they are all on our website, vop.com/disclosure, where you can not only listen to the program, but you can actually watch us as well. Well, today I am talking to Speranza Pesos, and Speranza, you've been sharing just the incredible journey that your family went on as you, as a Christian family, chose to escape communist Romania.
Yes.
And just before the break, you described the process, the first phase of your escape, and then getting to the American intelligence area where you were cleared to make sure you weren't spies in the midst of a Cold War era. You met someone who was kind, and he got you off to a refugee camp. But I want to pick back up where you started to describe before the break, which was the reason you were able to get through this experience. God was with you and your mother.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember throughout the entire process, every time I was afraid, Mom would remind me, you need to believe, you need to know that Jesus is with us. He will not leave us. He is with us. He is with us. He will get us through. He is our hope. He's our strength constantly. So the source of our strength was constantly God, and my mom reminding us that no matter what happens, God will not leave us. What is absolutely incredible also was how God actually revealed to us also a Seventh-day Adventist church in Turkey during our stay in the refugee camp, and how we actually received permission from the security officer, which was very difficult to receive, to leave the camp every Saturday and actually be part of the believers, and how God helped us to find that group of believers in Istanbul, Turkey, where we had no address, we had no idea how to find them, and how that security officer from the camp helped us to find the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Istanbul, Turkey. And that became our refuge, where we would spend our Sabbaths with other believers, knowing and being strengthened by their love and by their help and by their encouragement.
So you're in this refugee camp. For how many months are you and your mother there?
For 6 months.
6 months. You're able to find believers that fellowship and worship as you do to spend those days with. What a wonderful encouragement and blessing. You're able to talk to your father occasionally and keep those family connections together. But 6 months is a long time wondering what's going to happen next.
Absolutely.
And as you said, it wasn't like you were in a luxury hotel. You're in a refugee camp. You just had the basics of life. So when did you finally hear word that you could leave the refugee camp, and where did you head to next?
So we were actually transferred from Turkey. We were transferred to Italy, where we stayed for another 3 months. So pretty much 8 months.
Wow.
We were in a refugee camp situation, and then afterwards we were approved, and we received a visa to make our way to the United States. So we arrived in the United States in 1980, in the beginning of the year 1980, and we began the process now of helping my dad and my little sister to get and to be reunified as a family. As I mentioned to you, typically a family reunification could take up to 5 years.
Yes.
in an incredible way, in miraculous circumstances, God opened up the way, and we were reunified with our family in 13 months, which was
13
a
months.
long time, but an incredibly short time compared to what others had experienced.
Oh, yeah. That is a wonderful miracle. So you and your mom are in the refugee camps for right around 8 months. When
Yes.
you got to the U.S., did you have any family to greet you or to help you with that transition?
We did. My aunt
Okay.
and uncle, who had been refugees in Austria, had arrived previous to us, several months
Oh,
before,
okay.
and my uncle had also arrived as well. So it was my aunt and uncle that actually took care
Wonderful.
of us, and that was an incredible blessing
Yeah.
to be able to receive that assistance. So we came, and they were the ones that actually opened their doors.
Okay. Oh, well, praise
What
God.
a
And
blessing.
just less than a year, well, just over a year, this entire sequence of events happens where your
Yes.
family is reunited
Right.
in freedom. I can't imagine what that day was like. I'm sure it's embedded in your memory forever of what it was like when you finally got to hug your dad because you weren't able to hug him goodbye. What was that
Right.
like?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it will stay in my mind, etched forever, because I remember, just going to LAX and watching that plane land and just pressing my nose against the window and just wondering, when is he going to come out? When is he going to come out?
Yeah.
And everyone seemed to have walked off the plane, and finally it was as though he was the last one to come off the plane, and here he held this pretty beautiful little girl, just half asleep, on his shoulders, in his arms. And I remember just running towards him, almost stumbling over him and just holding him, and we just began just to weep because this was the first time we were able to hold each other in that many months, in over a year. And finally being able to be together as a family, no matter what was lost, no matter what had happened, God had made a way for us to be together. He made a way. He made a way, and He was faithful to His promise. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us.
Yes.
And He did that.
Yes.
And that just makes me think of that incredible reunion that God will have for us. And all I could picture was our Heavenly Father. How long does He yearn for us to just wrap His arms around us, and that day when He will come and pick us up and go home.
That wonderful reunion, the greatest of all reunions. Well,
Yeah.
Speranza, I know there are people listening right now who likely did not go through the circumstances that you went through, although there could be people who very much experienced what you did and have been blessed by remembering their own journeys of escaping from a communist regime. But I know there are people who are listening, and their trials are likely very different from yours. They may be facing a situation where they've lost work and they can't pay the bills. Perhaps they have a sick child or a sick spouse. What would you say to them to give them hope and encouragement during what might seem like an impossible or a hopeless situation?
So the only thing that carried me through and carried us through was the assurance that we were not alone, that God is with us, that God will make a way just like He promised. And I think the promise of Isaiah 41:10 and 13 that is reverberating in my mind and in my heart. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, because I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So that, to me, is the source of my strength. And as far as someone that might be going through a situation where they're not employed, they don't know how to pay their bills, I can tell you right now, my husband has been unemployed for the past 10 months. However, our God has been our strength, and somehow, some way, He has been our provider. Has it been easy? No. Is it difficult? Yes. Do you feel like sometimes you want to give up? Absolutely. But the only way I know that I can keep on going is holding on to God's promises and knowing without a doubt that I don't walk this journey alone, and neither do you.
Amen. Amen. Well, that's knowing that current situation that you're in, Speranza, just is an additional encouragement to me, really, because your circumstances are difficult, but you still have that hope in your voice. It pervades everything you say, and I know that you're still clinging to Him, and that gives me comfort and assurance that in spite of any of the circumstances we find ourselves in, God is the same. He's always the same, and we are never, ever alone. Well, your book, which I mentioned earlier, is titled Hope in Present Danger. It's extremely well written. It's very interesting. The rich detail that you give really brings your story to life. I have to ask you, what prompted you to share your story in book form?
Well, it wasn't. It certainly wasn't me, and it wasn't me getting up one morning and saying, "Oh, I think I'm going to just recount everything that I have gone through." I feel it was a direct request from the Lord and saying, "I want you to share what I have done for you." And literally for 2 years, I have done everything possible not to do what God had asked me to do, because that was a very painful memory, and I didn't feel like my story had really it was going to have that kind of an impact on anyone else. That's my story. So, this is what I went through. So how can that bless someone else? After 2 years, after I actually began writing somebody else's story, that came to a screeching halt. And I was crying out to the Lord and saying, God, why did this come to a screeching halt? I was going to write the story on faith and prayer, and that would definitely bless people's hearts.
Sure.
And the response was, I never told you to write anybody else's story. I told you to write what I have done for you, and I will determine whether or not this will be a blessing. So now, are you going to be obedient? Are you going to do what I have asked you to do? And from that day on, Jean, I decided, okay, God, if you are asking me to do this, then you are going to have to write the story. So every single day I would kneel down and say, God, I only want to be the funnel, just the funnel. You write your story, and you decide which way this is going to go. And so every single step of this story has been through prayer and knowing that really, truly, God is the author of this story. It is His story. And I know that because it is His story, it will be a blessing to others. Amen. Because He is our hope, no matter the danger.
Oh, amen. Well, Speranza, I am so glad that you followed His prompting and that you shared your story. And it has been a blessing to me, and I believe it has been a blessing to those who are listening right now. I want to ask that God will be with you as you go about your work there in Orlando, Florida, as spiritual ambassador, which sounds like a wonderful fit for you. They're encouraging employees who want to provide that spiritual encouragement, no matter their capacity in the hospital system. They want to act as spiritual leaders. So thank you, Speranza, for joining us today on Disclosure.
Thank you so much.
Well, and you listening, you may join us on our website, vop.com/disclosure, where you can not only listen to and watch this program, there is a lot of other really good stuff on that website too. If you listen to our ads during the breaks about Bible studies, that's where you can find our Bible studies as well. Click on the tab at the top of the page that says Study, and it will take you directly to those Bible lessons. And we would love to hear from you. Our address is there on the website as well. So thank you for joining us today. I hope that you take away from this that you can have hope. You are never alone, no matter the circumstances of your life. I'm Jean Boonstra, and you have been listening to Disclosure.